Phaden was a lifer, a 100-story man, a permanent resident of the Goringdale State Penitentiary. I'm sitting on my bunk when the guards bring him in. Each of his arms is over their shoulders, and his feet are dragging against the concrete. They open the cell and drop him at the entrance, slamming the cell closed as they leave. Vade hits the ground and groans. "How bad, Vade?" I ask. He lifts his head so I can see the bruises and gashes marking his face. He mocks a smile with what teeth he has left before he lets his face fall back to the floor. This was a normal occurrence. Every so often, Vade would disappear for a day or two. Then he'd get dragged back, usually in a similar state. This was the only time he kept his damn mouth shut, which was just fine with me. I had a theory that the warden picked cons he didn't like to put them in line. In most prisons, it keeps the cons docile and the guards angry. Of course, they might have just done it because Vade didn't know when to quit. I knew if I asked what he did this time, I'd have to knock him out just to get an hour of sleep. Last time, he offed one of the warden's high-value cons. I'm sure the man would have killed Vade himself if he wasn't worth a six-figure sum. Oh, the privatization of the prison system was a gold mine. That's why I was here. Sums that places like Goringdale charged for their services, those being slavery, murder, and torture, were tailored to politicians, country club members, and tech heads. I only had to mirror one of the prison services to keep in business. My fee for the current mark was $80,000. $20,000 bought my release, and I always took it out of what I made because I never wanted my clients to feel cheated. Besides, they ultimately decided whether I was left here to rot after taking care of their dirty work. This time I was due a net of 60. My rates could change based on the target, what they had done, and what they were truly worth. But I was always more affordable than the prison. "You've got to take it easy," I'd tell Vade. "There's going to come a point when you kill more than you're worth." Vade didn't like my preaching. It was how I got back at him for never shutting up. "Oh, I hope so," Vade grumbled. "No one wants to buy an environmental terrorist, or, release him for getting that park out of the way for the oil barons." "They have enough negative press as it is," I'd reply. "Besides, you just cut into their profit margin." "Yeah, well, I can thank the tree-hugging judges for that. Property damages bounty? They must have really loved that park." 300,000 would have bought Vade's freedom. Slavery or punishment. The prison never asked questions. Once the forms were signed, they became the buyer's responsibility. And no one wanted to be responsible for a prisoner who would likely kill again. If Vade had been set free, pulled the shit he did in here, then not only would he go to jail, but so would the owner of his contract. I hear him groan again. I lay back on my cot and dream about home and the money I'll make when my job here is done. Morning alarm goes off and I'm on my feet. Vade looks like he's been up for hours trying to get himself cleaned up. He gives me a toothless smile and I respond with a glare. We file out of our cell with the other inmates and the guards begin their routine check off by number. I switch off as we go through the same bland routine I've done 100 times before in Goringdale. Instead, I'm thinking about what I'll do with the money I'm owed. How long I'll have to wait to do a job like this again. I'm getting older, rushing through my 30s. But I enjoy this line of work. It isn't exactly something I can put in an application or get a degree for. I pull myself back into reality when I shovel my spork into Chef X Gangbanger's take on hot malto meal and phlegm. "Not bad," I comment as I spoon in a mouthful. "There's worse than this?" Vade asks. "Never been to one of the prisons in the southern states, I take it, then?" I ask. Vade shakes his head as the hot cereal drips off his spork and back onto his tray. "Prisoners used to disappear like they do here, except they don't show up tenderized after a day or so like you." I take a bite out of my stale biscuit and stare at my cellmate. Vade suffers through the cereal without giving me so much as a glance. When we're finally shuffled out into the light for yard time, I lean on the fence to the basketball courts. I Take out a cigarette I left in my beanie and light a match I bummed from a guard off my boot. Tanner Cale is shooting by himself on half of the court while a group of blacks were occupying the other half. Tanner Cale. He was the warden's emerald in a bucket full of pyrite. The man was worth more than a month's worth of gangbanger sales. Any of the inmates who touched Cale meant they were in for a fate worse than death. Taking him out was the key to my whole being here. Phaden hobbles over to me from the yard. Before he left the mess, I told him I needed a favor, after he did his rounds collecting cigs for whatever it was that got him his last beating. "So what do you need me to do?" he asks. "I've got a pack of cigs if you start a riot on that court." "I just got a pack today. You're gonna have to do better than that." "Two, then," I respond. He crosses his arms and he looks at the court. I'm almost hoping his mind is getting devious. I'd have loved any excuse to kill him, too. "Gale's on that court," he says. "Damn right. And they can't kill everyone involved in that riot." "You're a cheap sell, Taylor. You really want to fuck all that up?" "You're my inspiration, Vade." He smirks. Good old Vade. Never knew when to quit. I asked Vade for a riot and he gave me one. Second he walked inside the caged courts, he began shouting racial epithets and expletives at our reformed African-American population. The group rushed over, ignoring Cale and going to work on my cellmate. There was yelling from the other side of the yard. Aryans. Vade's beating had prompted them to rush inside the courts to exercise their own hatreds. Cale was lost in the shuffle of men beating each other for no other reason than sick tribalism. I put my hood up over my beanie and tossed my cigarette to the side before heading into the beating ground. Cale had managed to crawl out under the melee near the baseline. He looked as bruised and bloodied as Vade had the night before. I extend a hand to help him up. He takes it, probably thinking that I'm looking to curry favor with the warden. I heave him up hard and bring him in close to my body. He yelps out in pain, and I let him go, leaving my ship where I left it. Cale slumps to the ground, and I make my way back into the yard, past the guards rushing to restore order. I didn't see Vade get dragged back into his cell that night, and the news of the warden's retirement fund having been executed by supremacists in hoods swept quickly to the ears of the cons. Later that night, a pair of guards accompanied by a well-dressed man showed up at my cell. This was Mr. Mallory. "You've been purchased, inmate. On your feet." 15 minutes later, I'm in the sandy brown suit and blue tie I arrived at Goringdale in. I stand in front of the first mirror I've seen in months and take in my appearance. My eyes are still the same cornflower color of my tie. There are no new scars creasing over the old ones. My black hair is still showing strands of gray. Fast forward past the mirror, and I find myself riding in the back of an SUV with Mallory and his driver. He hands me a briefcase. I open it and thumb through a few stacks of bills. I counted extras. "You put too much in here," I say. "You stuck it to the slave traders for their snake oil practices. Think of it as a bonus," he replies, as he reaches at the center console for a bottle of champagne. I put the case between my legs and lay my head back against the leather seat, trying not to think about the torture the warden put Sealess Vade through before he took the brunt of the responsibility for my actions. I realized then that this could never be my last job. It wasn't just the murder I enjoyed. It was getting away with it.